She needs to stay away from that window,
said Merrill Canders, president of our HOA board, just seconds before she hurled the contents of her coffee cup toward my wife's chest. It hit with a sharp splash. Calla flinched but didn't cry out. Her white silk robe clung wet to her ribs. The mug bounced off our walkway and shattered against the garden curb. Merrill didn't blink. She stood there in tennis whites, one hand on her hip, like the lawn was her courtroom, and Calla's seat by the window was a criminal offense. "I've warned you once already," she said flatly, her voice low and scolding. "That window faces east. Community standards apply. Exposure counts as a violation." "You just assaulted my wife," I said. Her smirk returned. "Security footage says otherwise." I stepped forward, jaw tight. "That security footage still pings back to my server, not yours." She blinked once. "If you think HOA power trips end at citations and fines, you haven't met someone like Merrill Canders. And if you're the kind of person who believes it's just easier to keep your head down, maybe skip your morning coffee rather than start a war, I want you to stick around. You need to know how far some of these boards will go before someone stops them. My name is Lesrin Dorn. They think I just moved into Lot 19 with a quiet wife and a big yard. What they don't know is I own 62 private airports, each one underwritten by federal zoning laws that make HOA disputes look like lemonade stand rules. I write aviation corridor designations for a living. I know when a footprint violates a sound easement, and I know when a woman like Merrill forgets how power is measured. But this wasn't about power, not at first. That bay window chaise, the one Calla sits in every morning with her tea robe and yellow notepad, it belonged to my mother. The last time she sat in it was the morning we got the results that her cancer had metastasized. She didn't cry. She wrote, same as Calla does now. Calla had just finished her 4th round of targeted immunotherapy. Her energy had come back slowly. That chair was where she healed, where she marked her breathing, where she relearned what mornings could feel like. And now Merrill called it obscene, said her son's friends didn't need to see some woman lounging in a robe like it was a spa, tried to shame her with veiled bylaws about visual uniformity and curb-facing modesty. But none of those things mattered in that moment. Not her clipboard, not her HOA badge, not the stares of the 2 board members lingering across the street. All that mattered was the stunned look in Calla's eyes and the shaking in her hand as she tried to brush the coffee from her chest without looking up. I didn't raise my voice. I simply reached for the side of the pillar where a tiny black lens was mounted in the shadows, still blinking green. I built that surveillance system myself. Every data packet routes through a secure proxy hub I host out, of state. It's legal, documented, and most importantly, redundant. You missed the one camera that wasn't yours to wipe, I said. And I didn't just witness an assault. I recorded it in 4K. Merrill stiffened. Her hand dropped from her hip. The board hadn't seen me as a threat because I didn't attend their meetings. I didn't wave at every passing dog walker. I didn't plaster my home in flagstone or tulip beds. But I know code. I know noise compliance. I know fraudulent zoning claims and architectural misfilings when I see them. And what Merrill didn't realize yet, what she was about to learn the hard way, is that this neighborhood's aviation-friendly designation is the only reason their insurance premiums stayed low. That designation requires FAA-verified noise buffers that don't exist. But that's not what this is about. This is about a woman who threw coffee at my wife for sitting by a window and believed the neighborhood would applaud her for it. And this is where it ends. Where are you watching from? Because you should see what happens next. The letter came the next morning. It was folded twice, hand-delivered in a plastic HOA envelope, and clipped to our mailbox with a pink ribbon. Merrill's signature move when she wanted to pretend hostility was policy. Notice of violation, visual disruption, and non-compliance with window aesthetic regulations. It listed Calla's visible attire as a Class B visibility infraction, cited subsection 14.3 of the Wisteria Flight View Supplemental Guidelines, and imposed a fine of $800 payable within 7 business days. An additional $50 per day would accrue until external visual compliance was achieved. I read it twice. They had written her robe into the record like it was graffiti. Beneath the fine print, a small box was checked. Recommended for architectural compliance review. I looked up at the bay window, the same chair, the same teacup, the same woman whose name wasn't mentioned once in the letter, only described as resident, stripped of identity, as if Kala's presence had been reduced to a visual nuisance in someone else's landscape. I went inside. She was already folding the robe away in her lap. "I won't sit there anymore," she said, not defeated, just hollow. "It's not worth it." I knelt beside her. "It is." Her eyes didn't rise from the yellow notepad she'd stopped writing in mid-sentence. She only nodded once, and that was worse than silence. That evening, I pulled up the HOA's online portal. Most residents never look beyond the dues section or the pool calendar, but I wasn't most residents. I dug through the archives, the footnotes, the metadata that gets left behind when sloppy boards update bylaws with a legal pad and an ego. What I found wasn't just targeting, it was patterned abuse. Over the last 18 months, 12 violations had been issued for curtain-based non-compliance. 8 were directed at women over 50. 5 involved inappropriate use of window-facing interior furniture. 2 had attached photographs taken from outside the homes, without consent. And every single one had come from Merrill's end of the board. The so-called visibility harmony policy wasn't part of the original CC&Rs. It had been slipped in under the 2021 Supplemental Regulations memo, approved in a private board vote without quorum and digitally backdated. There were no records of legal counsel review, no homeowner vote, just a scanned PDF and a circular signature from Merrill Canders with her title in 3 fonts. I flagged the document and downloaded the original upload logs. Timestamps don't lie. Across the street, solar lanterns lit up Merrill's driveway like a landing strip. Her garden gnomes, painted to look like tiny flight attendants, stood stiff under the walkway arch. She was still out there, clipboard under her arm, talking with someone who lived 2 houses down, probably bragging about the enforcement, probably rewriting the story already. I closed the blinds slowly and sat down next to Kala. The robe was gone. Her sweater sleeves were pulled over her hands. "They'll escalate," she said quietly. "They always do." "I know." I didn't say what I was thinking, that this wasn't just a violation. It was a coordinated erasure, the kind that wraps itself in bylaws and pretends it's protecting the community from inconsistency, when really it's just removing anything it doesn't control, and they thought I wouldn't notice. But I did. I noticed the way they used language that couldn't be challenged in plain English, the way they used visual cohesion instead of modesty, public-facing exposure instead of someone might see her, the way the fine was posted on the same day of the week as every other one in the pattern, Friday, just in time to ruin a weekend but avoid being overturned before Monday. They'd built an entire framework of false professionalism around a personal vendetta, and they thought, because I'd stayed quiet this long, I'd keep doing it. But Merrill forgot something critical. Wisteria, Flightview's market value, wasn't driven by charm. It was driven by a 5-star aviation corridor rating from the FAA, tied to a specific set of zoning certifications. Certifications that were easy to get if you submitted accurate soundproofing data. Certifications that Merrill had no business applying for in the first place. And if she'd faked even one detail, then none of the insurance discounts tied to those ratings would hold. Not for her. Not for anyone on the street. They poked the wrong quiet man. And this time, I wasn't starting a conversation. I was preparing a collapse. I found him the next day behind his garage, sleeves rolled up, polishing a rusted propeller that looked more sentimental than functional. Harlan Spence lived 3. Doors down, retired air traffic controller, widower, and the only man on the board who didn't smile when Merrill Canders entered a room. He didn't look up when I called his name. "Heard about the letter," he said, voice flat. "She likes to make examples early in the season. She threw scalding coffee at my wife." That made him pause. The rag in his hand froze mid-turn. "You sure it wasn't—" "I recorded it." A gust of wind knocked loose a few dead leaves from the gutter above us. Harlan dropped the rag and let out a slow breath through his nose. "Then, you'd better make backups." He walked toward his workbench, avoiding my eyes. The space smelled like machine oil and pine dust. Tools were laid out with obsessive precision, every wrench lined by size, every screw type separated by color-coded trays. A man used to control, used to routine. "Why'd you stay on the board?" I asked. "You've seen what she's been doing." He gave a dry laugh. "Seen? Son, I've signed the damn paperwork." That landed heavier than I expected. Harlan leaned against the counter, rubbing his thumb along a cracked knuckle. When my wife was alive, she liked this neighborhood. Said it felt safe, clean, predictable. After she passed, Meryl started talking about image, about keeping Wisteria distinguished. Next thing I know, she's rewriting half the policies under something called the Harmony Plan. Nobody reads fine print. They just nod and pay dues. And you let her? I'm not proud, he said quietly. She runs this place like an air tower. Everyone follows orders or they're out. I figured letting her have her rules was better than fighting her every week. That policy targets women, Harlan. You know that. He didn't argue, just reached for a small stool, sat down, and stared at the ground. The silence stretched. She said Calla was indecent, I added. Said her robe violated public-facing standards. You ever heard that phrase before? Yeah, he muttered. She pulled it from an airport security manual, visual exposure regulations for glass-walled terminals. Thought it sounded official. My stomach tightened. The audacity wasn't just offensive, it was tactical. Meryl had borrowed the language from aviation safety codes to make aesthetic control sound federal. You kept those drafts? I asked. He looked up sharply. You think I kept proof? I think you don't delete things without backing them up first. Controllers don't work that way. A long beat passed. His jaw twitched. You really want to drag this out? I'm not dragging anything. She already crossed the line. I'm just drawing it where it belongs. He ran a hand down his face. She'll destroy you. She's done it before. Blacklisted a couple in Phase 1 after they complained about landscaping assessments. Told the whole board they were unstable. Next meeting, they'd moved out. No one even asked why. Then maybe it's time someone asked. Harlan exhaled slowly, the tired kind. You're not the first to push back. You might be the last. I stepped closer. You were an air traffic controller. You know what happens when someone forgets who has authority over the airspace. That made him smile, barely. Yeah, they get grounded. He picked up the rag again but didn't return to the propeller. His eyes flicked to the side wall, where a filing cabinet sat half buried under stacked toolboxes. I didn't say a word. He caught my glance, followed it, and after a pause long enough to count by heartbeats, he said, Everything's digital now. Cloud archive, shared drive, same one Meryl uses for board drafts. I don't know how long she keeps her files open when she's editing, but she forgets to change permission settings. Meaning? Meaning you might see more than she wants you to. I nodded once. I won't involve you. He shrugged. Doesn't matter. She already thinks I'm slipping. I just haven't decided whether to prove her right. He stood, wiping his hands clean, and pointed toward the garage door. Look, Dorn, some fights aren't about what's right. They're about who gets tired first. Meryl never tires. Then I'll make her broke before she gets tired. His eyes narrowed with reluctant respect. Careful. People who think they're invincible usually have friends in insurance. I've got friends in zoning. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. Yeah, I bet you do. As I walked out, the sun cut a thin orange line across the propeller blade. The reflection hit my eyes. Sharp, fleeting, perfect symmetry. The kind of balance you only get before everything starts to fall apart. By the time I reached the street, I already knew what I was going to do. If Meryl wanted to play authority, she'd get it. Complete with compliance audits, federal paperwork, and noise certification forms, she'd never survive. She built her empire on false designations. I was going to let gravity do the rest. 3 days later, the next escalation came. This time, it wasn't a letter. It was a visit. I was in the middle of loading groceries when 2 members of the Architectural Compliance Subcommittee walked up my driveway unannounced, clipboard in hand, branded HOA windbreakers zipped to the collarbone like they were here for inspection, not intimidation. Mr. Dorn, the taller one said, a man named Pierce I barely recognized from the annual block BBQ. We're here to initiate a preliminary visual assessment on behalf of the board. For what? East-facing visual violations per subsection 14.3, he said, already flipping to a checklist. There's been a continued failure to comply with standard curtain uniformity, as well as refusal to obscure resident activity visible from community thoroughfares. Activity? I asked. He didn't. Blink. Your wife, sir. Behind me, I heard the trunk of my car close. Calla stood near the doorway, keys in hand, wearing the same soft green sweater and jeans she'd worn to her last follow-up appointment. She watched from behind the storm door, no expression on her face, just a slow inhale, then stillness. "Let me guess," I said. "You're going to recommend mandatory frosted film installation or forced curtain upgrade." The second inspector, a woman I recognized from the landscaping committee, Cheryl something, gave a shallow nod. "It's in the recommendations, yes. For residents flagged twice, the board has discretion." I laughed once. "Discretion?" Pierce leaned forward slightly. "If we detect an ongoing pattern of nonconformity, the HOA can initiate fines up to $150 per day and suspend common area access until corrections are made. So, because my wife prefers sunlight while reading a book near a window, you're suggesting she's violating public decorum?" Neither answered. They just stood there, holding forms written in bureaucratic gray. I stepped aside and motioned toward the house. "Feel free to assess from the sidewalk. That's the limit of your jurisdiction." Cheryl hesitated. "We'd like to verify the dimensions of the bay window and its curtain density from the interior vantage, if permitted." "You're not permitted," I said, "and if you step 1 foot past the threshold, that becomes trespassing." Pierce's mouth opened to speak, but the words didn't come. I raised my phone and snapped a picture. "That'll be logged with timestamp and GPS metadata. You've been warned once. Don't test the second line." After a pause, they nodded, turned without another word, and walked back down the driveway. No apology, no acknowledgement, just silent documentation. Calla didn't say anything until they were gone. "They won't stop," she said quietly. "She's using everything she can." "She's trying to wear us out," I replied, "but she doesn't know what she's risking." I pulled up the HOA's digital bulletin board that night. The subcommittee's latest resolution was already posted. A proposed neighborhood-wide curtain ordinance. All east-facing windows were to be covered with board-approved opaque materials by the 1st of the month, or residents would incur compounding non-compliance penalties. The policy was framed in language about protecting community uniformity and avoiding inconsistent morning reflections, citing a made-up study on visual pollution and mental clarity disruption in shared space optics. It sounded scientific. It wasn't. The language had been lifted from an academic design thesis on airport lounge lighting and stripped of all context. But something else caught my eye. A footnote at the bottom of the notice: Wisteria Flight View remains compliant with FAA Quiet Flight Residential Designation under certification. File Yata QF Mafringstone for 4.1 as issued per structural sound attenuation submissions. Structural sound attenuation, I highlighted the phrase. That file number had been referenced on a zoning board approval form when I was researching regional corridor maps 2 weeks ago. At the time, it hadn't meant much, just a designation stamp. Now it was a thread. Quiet flight certification wasn't just a vanity title. It came with real insurance benefits. But to qualify, a neighborhood had to submit third-party acoustic reports proving their homes had specialized insulation, vibration-dampening windows, and precise structural tolerances within proximity to flight paths. Wisteria homes didn't have that. I knew, because my own didn't. I pulled up the FAA archive, searched the file number, no public access. But I had credentials from a zoning compliance consultancy I still did occasional contract work for. I logged in through the secure portal, found it. The structural attenuation report attached to Wisteria Flight View's designation had been uploaded 3 years ago by none other than Merrill Canders. No architectural firm, no acoustics engineer, just her name, her initials, her digital signature. There were no test results attached, no decibel thresholds, no registered auditor stamp. It was fake, and if that report fell apart, the designation would collapse, which meant the insurance discounts that held this neighborhood's premiums below the regional average would disappear. And so would Merrill's power. The certification file was a ghost, present on paper but hollow when pressed. No third-party documentation, no accompanying blueprints, not even a scanned invoice for the acoustic insulation that supposedly blanketed every home in Wisteria Flight View. Just Merrill Canders' digital signature on a self-issued report and a one-page summary copied line for line from a municipal airport design guide. The only reason it hadn't been challenged was simple. No one had ever looked until now. I leaned back from my monitor and stared at the ceiling, counting the seconds between each breath. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, still on the login page of the FAA internal portal, the session timer blinking slowly in the corner. This wasn't an accusation. This was proof of regulatory fraud, and if it unraveled publicly, it wouldn't just be Merrill at risk. It would be every resident who bought into this community believing the insurance rates, zoning exemptions, and FAA designation were real. She hadn't just forged a document. She had used that lie to build a kingdom. The clock in the hall ticked loudly into the silence. I closed the session, downloaded the file, and encrypted 3 backups onto separate drives. Then, I printed the summary report and filed it inside a travel folder I used for business. Something that looked ordinary, forgettable. Calla found me an hour later in the garage. I was sitting beside the old weatherproof bin labeled Archive, Client Site, 42, running my hands over its cracked lid, even though I had no intention of opening it. She sat next to me without asking. "You found something, didn't you?" I nodded. "Something big. Are we safe?" "Not yet." She looked at me sideways. "But we could be." I glanced down at her hands, steady now, even in the dim light. No tremor in her voice, no fear left behind her eyes. Just that same quiet endurance she'd always carried, like a lighthouse in fog. "She'll retaliate," I said. "She won't do it through the board. She'll use pressure, gossip, quiet threats." "She already has." I turned toward her. "She sent an anonymous email to my former clinic." My stomach dropped. "When?" "This morning." She looked away. "Claimed I was making inappropriate displays in front of minors. Used the word unstable." Rage didn't arrive as an explosion. It came cold, controlled, the kind of anger that plans things. "She's trying to isolate you," I said. "Undermine your credibility before anything public happens. She thinks I'll fold. She doesn't understand the people she's trying to bury." I stood slowly and pulled the folder from the shelf, holding it like a blueprint I hadn't read in years. "If I trigger this, it won't be a fight. It'll be an implosion. She won't see it coming. Neither will the board, but the fallout's going to be wide." Calla nodded, then said, "Don't hold back." The next morning, I started small. I requested a formal record of Wisteria Flight View's FAA Quiet Flight Certification from the county zoning office, citing professional interest as a corridor consultant. No red flags, no resistance. They sent it within hours, same file number, same summary, still no technical attachments, still no verifiable origin. I logged the receipt. Then I called my contact at Southeast Urban Insurance, a friend from an old zoning project in Georgia, now a field assessor for risk evaluation across high net density suburbs. Her name was Selby Tran. She owed me a favor. "You're not calling for small talk," she said immediately when she answered. "I need a silent verification on a community listing," I said. "Wisteria Flight View Estates, Northern District. FAA QF 1941 certification." Pause. A few clicks on her end. "Okay, yeah, I see it," she said. "Discounted premiums across the board, issued in 2022. Interesting. Attached under a policy cluster labeled Local Attenuation Trust. That's rare. Would your company audit the validity if that certification proved fraudulent?" "Absolutely, especially if it touches reinsurance liability." "Why?" "Because it's fake." She didn't respond at first. Then, "You have proof?" "I have the raw file and the absence of supporting documents." "If what you're saying is true, that neighborhood's rates will spike hard, possibly retroactive penalties. You sure you want that?" "Kind of blowback?" "I want it accurate." "Then send what you have. Use the burner drop. I'll escalate it clean." I hung up and opened the encrypted backup. This wasn't a warning shot. This was a pin to a pressure valve. The only question was how long before Merrill felt it burst. 2 days passed in silence, not the good kind. Merrill didn't respond through official channels, didn't escalate another letter, or dispatch her clipboard brigade to knock on our door. Instead, she let the neighborhood carry her message. I saw it in the glances from the dog-walking couples who used to nod politely, in the sudden shift of energy when I stepped onto my porch, in the way conversations stopped the moment I crossed the common path. Even Calla noticed it. The neighbor who used to drop off lemons from her backyard tree didn't come by this week. The man who usually jogged past our mailbox avoided eye contact. It wasn't fear, it was suspicion. Whatever Meryl had spread, it was enough to put us under the light. And she'd done it without leaving a single fingerprint. But I hadn't been idle either. Selby confirmed what I already suspected. The insurance audit request had moved up the chain. Her department opened a formal inquiry. The quiet flight designation was under immediate review. And if no valid acoustic report surfaced in the next 14 days, the risk class on every single property in Wisteria, Flightview would be recalculated. And that meant consequences, the kind that turned HOA presidents into liabilities overnight. I thought that would be the first crack. But Meryl had other plans. That Friday, Calla received a citation in the mail. This one didn't come from the HOA. It came from the County Beautification Board. Violation. Unpermitted modification of visual perimeter aesthetics. Specifically, her rose bushes. The same rose bushes she planted 3 years ago. The same ones the HOA newsletter once featured in their Summer Serenity photo spread. Now, according to the citation, they exceeded the allowable height for front-facing flora in proximity to regulated window lines. The wording was absurd, bureaucratic nonsense twisted into punishment. But what caught my attention wasn't the fine, it was the signature, filed by Marla Jensen, HOA-appointed liaison to County Aesthetic Oversight. Meryl had called in a favor. I called the board office, requested to speak to Marla, got a voicemail. I left no message. Instead, I emailed the county records office and requested all official appointments tied to the Wisteria HOA over the last 12 months. Marla's name didn't appear once. I checked the public registry. She wasn't listed as an official liaison. She had no credentials, no appointment, nothing. Which meant the citation wasn't just retaliatory, it was fraudulent, and that was enough. That evening, I went into the attic and pulled out the original blueprints for our home, the ones the builder gave me at signing. Tucked inside was the certification label for our insulation model, standard fiberglass, no acoustic attenuation, no vibration buffering, just basic thermal control. No home in this neighborhood met the FAA requirement. I scanned the document, sent it to Selby, and added a personal note. You now have a verified example of non-compliance. All homes in Wisteria were built with identical specifications. I can get statements from 3 other owners quietly. She responded within the hour. That's more than enough. They'll issue provisional revocation next, final ruling within 7 business days. You'll feel the fallout before then. I forwarded the blueprint to a private drive and shut my laptop. Then I stood at the bay window where Calla used to sit. The chair was still there, untouched. No teacup, no yellow notepad. Just the morning light that still poured in every day like nothing had changed. Except, everything had. This wasn't about fines anymore. It wasn't about curtains or robes or flowers. It was about control. Meryl knew something was coming. She didn't know what, but she could feel the tremor beneath her foundation. And like any threatened ruler, she'd started to strike out sideways, hoping to damage morale before the walls collapsed. But she miscalculated one thing. I hadn't gone public yet. I hadn't rallied neighbors. I hadn't shown my cards. I'd given her silence, and she used it to paint us as the problem. But I wasn't silent because I was scared. I was building a wall she couldn't see, and when it fell, she wouldn't just lose a battle, she'd lose her crown. Harlan called just after sunrise. No preamble, just 5 words, low and clipped. She's drafting a counterfile. I didn't need clarification. Meryl was trying to cover her tracks. I'd seen it before in corporate boards, scramble to fabricate after the real records are gone. Create a late-stage report with fake timestamps. Hope no one digs too deep. But this wasn't a boardroom. This was a neighborhood pretending to be above scrutiny, and Harlan was done pretending. Meet me in 30, he added. Not here, library lot. He hung up before I could reply. By the time I parked near the public library, Harlan was already standing near the edge of the lot, a canvas duffel slung over one shoulder. He didn't wave, just gave a short nod and got into the passenger seat. He smelled like early morning coffee and cedar polish. His eyes were red. I kept backups, he said, pulling a thumb drive from his coat pocket. Not for her, for me. I didn't trust where this was headed after she started locking board sessions, recording without telling anyone, then deleting minutes before posting them. He handed it over like it weighed more than it did. This has everything: internal drafts, voice memos, and the original FAA sound attenuation application she submitted. My fingers closed around the drive. You saw her forge it? No, but I saw the blank she started with. He paused. She copied the format from a regional zoning packet I filed back in 2017 for an airport lounge permit, changed the header, kept the layout, even reused a few sentence fragments. You still have the original? He nodded. That's why I knew something was off. It was my writing, just twisted, like a funhouse mirror version of something I once signed off on. I slotted the drive into my laptop right there in the car. Folder after folder loaded, each one time-stamped, each one organized far better than Merrill ever suspected of him. The gem was buried inside a folder labeled Board, Non-Finals, Mirror. A raw recording, board call audio from 6 months ago. Merrill's voice sharp and clear. Nobody outside this community will check the FAA paperwork. They never do. It's a checkbox. We claim the insulation, we get the designation, everyone saves money. We're doing them a favor. Then another voice, one I didn't recognize, asking, and what happens if someone does check? Merrill's reply came quick. Then we act surprised. We blame the builder. The permits are vague enough. It's all about tone control, presentation. I sat back, the car suddenly too warm. My jaw tightened. I should have given this to you weeks ago, Harlan said, quieter now. But I kept hoping someone else would push back first. Someone without history, someone who hadn't helped her build this. You didn't build this, I said. You just watched it take shape. Same difference. We sat in silence for a while. Morning joggers passed nearby, unaware of the evidence-trading hands in a silent sedan just off their route. Then Harlan asked, You going public with it? Not yet. First I finish what I started, then I let her pull the pin herself. He nodded. She's going to come after you. I'm counting on it. He pulled a folded document from his duffel. Then take this too. It's the HOA's Architectural Integrity Resolution. She amended it last month, quietly. It lets her seize temporary authority if the board's credibility is compromised. You expose her wrong, she invokes it right. She thinks she'll get ahead of it. She's setting a trap, but she doesn't know someone already disarmed it. The document bore Merrill's initials at the bottom, but someone else had reviewed it. Harlan had slipped his own counter clause into the fine print, one that invalidated emergency authority if the violation stemmed from misrepresented credentials. She never reads the review section, he said. She just skims for the signature lines. I shook my head. You waited a long time to move. He gave a sad smile. Some of us need to see the damage before we admit the spark was ours. We drove back in silence. At his curb, he stepped out without another word. Just a nod. Back home, I made 6 copies of the drive. 2 encrypted, 1 set for cloud upload, 1 in a fireproof safe, 1 for Selby, 1 for my attorney. I opened the files again and played Merrill's voice one more time. Tone control, presentation. She'd wrapped her fraud in branding and hoped no one would tug at the edges. But now, I had the seam. And I was going to tear it wide open. The footage alone would have been enough. But I wasn't aiming for enough. I was aiming for irreversible. That night, I assembled what looked like a personal zoning audit. Nothing flashy, nothing labeled to raise alarms. Just a calm, precise folder full of numbered exhibits. Sound attenuation claim, missing test data, structural inconsistency, insurance fraud exposure risk. Every page was backed by metadata, time-stamped files, and visual screenshots cross-referenced with county records. And on the very last page, a full transcript of Merrill's voice from Harlan's recording, annotated and verified with a voice print analysis plugin I use for contractor fraud cases. I labeled it Compliance Discrepancy Packet, Wisteria HOA QF 1441. I sent 1 copy to Selby Tran under encrypted transfer, 1 to the FAA's Corridor Zoning Review Department, routed through my consultant credentials, and 1 to the County Development Oversight Committee. I didn't send it with accusations. I didn't name Merrill in the subject line. I filed it as a potential systemic compliance gap that might impact residential risk stratification. Bureaucratic understatement. the kind that gets eyes on it without raising the war drums too early. And then I waited. Calla watched me from the window the next morning, her tea untouched. She hadn't sat in the chaise in over a week now, but she stood there each day back straight, eyes forward, robe traded for cotton sweaters and long pants, as if erasing the image Meryl had painted, but not surrendering it. "She's going to sense it," she said. "She'll smell the smoke before she sees the fire," I replied. By noon, I received a ping from Selby. Short. They flagged it. Internal alert triggered. Wisteria now under elevated audit. Timeline, 3 days. 3 days until provisional revocation, which meant Meryl had, at most, 72 hours before her kingdom's foundation cracked beneath her feet. But Meryl wasn't waiting around. At 3:16 p.m., I received an email directly from the HOA board. Subject: Urgent, Special Board. Session notification. Body: Due to recent resident behavior impacting community confidence, a special session will be held in 24 hours to discuss temporary leadership restructuring and community policy enforcement revisions. That was her move. She wasn't going to fight the documents. She was going to strip the board of power before the impact hit. Trigger a community protection clause, install herself with executive override authority, and frame it as safeguarding the neighborhood from misinformation. The walls were shaking, and instead of bracing for collapse, Meryl was grabbing the nearest scepter, but Harlan had already clipped the fuse. I dug into the board's amendment logs again. Sure enough, the clause she was invoking fell under Resolution 8.6, Emergency Board Empowerment in Crisis Scenarios. The wording gave her the right to assume full administrative control only if no material wrongdoing by sitting officers existed at the time of emergency. But that clause, buried in the revision's footnote, had a line inserted by Harlan. If the emergency arises from any act of credential misrepresentation by board officers, the clause shall be rendered null. Credential misrepresentation, like falsifying a sound attenuation certification. She hadn't read it. She'd signed it, filed it, published it. And now she was standing on a trigger wired to her own fraud. I clicked the HOA's public-facing portal and opened the discussion feed. A new thread had gone live. Emergency leadership poll, confidence vote pending. Meryl had posted it with the usual performative polish. Concerned about decorum, worried about disruption, emphasizing dangerous rumors and outside influence. Replies had already started to trickle in. Most were cautious. A few were clearly scripted by loyalists. And then came the wild card. A comment from a neighbor 2 blocks away. Julia Martinez, the one with the autistic son who'd once been fined for sidewalk chalk art deemed graffiti. She wrote, "I don't know what's happening yet, but I know the HOA fined my kid $100 for drawing a heart. If anyone's finally asking questions, I support it." Then another. "I asked last year for a breakdown of where our insurance rebates come from. Never got an answer. Following." Then another. The silence was cracking. I didn't reply. I didn't feed it. Not yet. Instead, I uploaded a sanitized copy of the FAA certificate, no redactions, no accusations, just a single sentence highlighted. Filed without engineering source. No supporting acoustic verification, no name, no context. Just a quiet match tossed into dry brush. By midnight, the thread had over 50 replies, and Meryl still hadn't realized that the language she used to crown herself was the same sentence that would dethrone her. The day of the emergency board session felt like a dress rehearsal for a coup. Meryl orchestrated everything: time, setting, even the seating arrangement. It wasn't held in the clubhouse like usual. This time, it was outside, under the shade pavilion near the artificial koi pond, public enough to look transparent, but controlled enough to keep pressure low. No microphones, no camera feed, just printed agendas and clipboards like the old-school HOA meetings you'd see in realtor brochures. I didn't sit. I stood just outside the semicircle of chairs, not pretending to be a participant. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to watch a collapse in real time. Meryl arrived 5 minutes late, as expected. She wore navy slacks and a crisp white blouse with a small HOA pin fastened just below the collar. Subtle authority, nothing overplayed. Her expression was flat, neutral, maybe even bored. She scanned the crowd, landed on me, then moved on like I wasn't worth reacting to. Good. Let her think I'd already played my hand. Harlan sat 2 chairs away from her. He hadn't brought his duffel bag this time. No notes, just a folder tucked beneath his coat, and a thermos of coffee he never once sipped. The meeting opened with a prepared statement. Meryl thanked everyone for attending under such manufactured stress. She spoke of viral disinformation, weaponized ambiguity, and the importance of administrative stability during digital turbulence. She was trying to sound corporate, professional, but she was rushing her words. That was new. Then she turned the tone. As of this morning, she said, the board is considering a motion to temporarily consolidate administrative power until the current narrative climate stabilizes. That means one clear voice to guide this community, one leadership channel, and, if necessary, the authority to suspend procedural votes that could be weaponized against neighborhood peace. She smiled. She actually smiled. It was soft, almost motherly. And the moment she finished speaking, I raised my hand, not to ask, to be recognized. I don't believe we're finished with community transparency, I said. Meryl's jaw tightened. You're not on the board, Mr. Dorn. No, I replied, but I am a licensed corridor zoning consultant and a property owner and a witness to a public filing irregularity that now affects every insurance-backed rate in this neighborhood. A murmur rose from the gathered residents. Meryl's smile faded. I have here, I continued, holding up a copy of the FAA Quiet Flight Certificate, a document submitted under this HOA's leadership. It references acoustic attenuation specifications that were never installed. It includes no engineering sign-off, no registered audit trail, just one name, yours. She stood, clipboard still in hand. This isn't the place. This is exactly the place, I said, because this meeting was called under Resolution 8.6, Emergency Empowerment. But that clause includes a condition, that no material wrongdoing by sitting board officers exist at the time of invocation. And thanks to a board revision signed by your own vice president, I glanced at Harlan. That clause is void if credential misrepresentation is discovered. Harlan opened his folder and handed a single printed amendment to the treasurer, slowly, silently. I didn't misrepresent anything, Meryl said, her voice rising now. We've always operated in good faith. That's not what the FAA thinks. I stepped forward and placed a sealed envelope on the HOA table. Inside is the preliminary audit report. Wisteria Flight View has been flagged for revocation. Once it finalizes, your policy-linked discounts will disappear. Retroactive rate recalculations will trigger premium hikes across all 118 homes. Gasps, then silence. She reached for the envelope, but someone else got to it first, the treasurer. He didn't open it, just stared at the outside where Selby Tran's name and agency stamp were printed. I've submitted all of this to the proper agencies, I said, but I haven't released it publicly. Yet. Meryl's hand dropped from the clipboard. I turned to the crowd. If the community votes today to halt the power consolidation motion, I won't file a fraud complaint. Not yet. If the board is dissolved voluntarily and a stewardship council formed, I won't publish Meryl's recorded comments. Not unless I have to. Everyone was looking at her now. Even her loyalists. Even the people she thought would never break rank. No one moved. Then Harlan stood. I second the motion, he said quietly, to suspend Resolution 8.6, effective immediately. And the vote began. The vote wasn't close. Out of the 39 residents who attended, 32 voted to suspend Resolution 8.6. 4 abstained. 3 sided with Meryl. 2 of them were her friends from the beautification committee, and the third looked like he regretted it before his hand was even back in his lap. She didn't speak for a long time. Not when the vote passed, not when the treasurer read the result aloud, not when Harlan formally motioned to dissolve the emergency leadership clause pending legal review. She just sat there, perfectly still, the clipboard on her lap, now nothing more than decoration. The paper beneath her fingers crinkled as her grip tightened, but her face gave nothing away. Then, with all the calm of someone who had memorized the fall of Rome in her head, she stood. I'd like to make a personal statement for the record, she said. Her voice was even, trained. She looked directly at me. Mr. Dorn is wrong. Her eyes scanned the crowd. This neighborhood has thrived because we enforce standards, because we chose uniformity over chaos, decorum over disorder. There's always someone who thinks they're smarter, stronger, or more qualified to lead. But what they don't realize is that leadership is stewardship. I protected this community. No one responded. She nodded to herself, then added, "And when the audit clears, I'll expect an apology." Then she walked out. No folder, no speech, no threats, just silence. The kind you leave behind when you've built something on sand and the tide's already coming in. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. Because 30 minutes later, the FAA's preliminary revocation notice went public. It appeared first in the regional zoning bulletin, tucked between two noise corridor reclassifications and a set of proposed flight path adjustments. Dry reading if you didn't know what to look for. But I knew. Certification QF 1141 provisionally revoked pending full audit. Sound attenuation documentation insufficient. Insurance indexing review initiated. By dusk, 3 emails had already hit the HOA inbox, all from separate carriers, all requesting immediate disclosure of updated zoning and compliance data for Wisteria Flightview Estates. That wasn't the end, that was the beginning. By midnight, residents were posting in the community forum. Why is my mortgage provider asking about zoning compliance? Did the FAA decertify our neighborhood? Who's responsible for the insurance spike warning I just got? I didn't answer, not publicly. Instead, I updated Selby with the vote count, then uploaded my documentation package to a third-party platform used by municipal regulators. That would trigger an interagency validation within 48 hours. Merrill couldn't intercept or slow it, and the moment final revocation came down, the insurance companies wouldn't just raise premiums, they'd reassess liability coverage across all shared spaces governed by the HOA, which meant the board, as it existed, was financially non-viable. I forwarded one last package to the County Housing Oversight Committee, a clean proposal to replace the HOA with a resident-led stewardship council, minimal dues, rotating volunteer oversight, transparency first operations, no executive power structure, no blanket aesthetic policies, no closed-door resolutions, just neighbors deciding together. 3 days passed before I heard from Merrill again. It came in the form of a certified letter. No return address, no note inside. Just a printed sheet of paper, Resolution 8.6, now officially void, stamped with the treasurer's signature and dated the morning after the vote. The last line had been underlined in red. This clause is null and unenforceable in the presence of verified misrepresentation by sitting officers. I folded it once and filed it in the back of my office drawer. That evening, I sat beside Calla at the window. She hadn't spoken much in the days since the vote, not because she was avoiding the subject, but because some victories don't require commentary. They only require breathing space. The chair creaked slightly beneath her as she shifted, sunlight streaking across her shoulder. She reached for her notepad. No trembling hand, no cautious glance at the glass. Outside, the world moved on like it always did. Quiet, complicated, and full of things you can't always control. But this space, this view, this right to sit in your own damn chair and be left alone, that was ours again. No board, no badge, no permission slip. Just morning light and the long, slow exhale of peace earned the hard way. The final board meeting was supposed to be ceremonial, quiet, a clean transition of power wrapped in polite formality. That's what the agenda said, but no one who showed up expected what actually happened. It was held in the clubhouse this time, the chairs arranged in neat rows like it was still a functioning system. The long table at the front had nameplates. Merrill's was still there, though she hadn't spoken publicly since the vote. No one had seen her at the mail kiosk. No more clipboard patrols. Her absence echoed louder than her presence ever had. I arrived early, not to sit, but to watch. Calla stayed home. She didn't need to be there. Her victory didn't need an audience. When the room filled, it wasn't with tension. It was anticipation. The kind of collective breath a group holds when they know something is ending and don't know what it's going to become yet. Harlan stood at the front, not behind the table, but beside it. No pretense of authority. Just a man with a folder and a tired kind of resolve in his face. "This is the last official act of the Wisteria Flightview HOA Board," he said, voice even. per resident vote and financial ineligibility triggered by FAA revocation, this body will dissolve effective immediately upon adjournment. He glanced at Merrill's empty chair. Motions have been filed for stewardship transition. Volunteers will coordinate the changeover. All previous fines not already collected are null. All ongoing violations are voided. A quiet gasp from the back. Someone whispered, "Finally!" Someone else exhaled like they had been holding it for months. Then Harlan turned toward me. "Mr. Dorn," he said, "would you like the floor?" I stepped forward, not with a speech but with a folder. Same size, same format, but thinner now. No threats, just closure. "I've submitted everything," I said. "FAA review is complete. The insurance restructuring will take time, but new assessments will reflect the actual specifications of our homes, not inflated ones." Someone asked if that meant rates would go up. I didn't lie. For a few months, yes, then they'll stabilize. The discounts we had were based on fiction, and fiction doesn't hold up when money's on the line. There were nods, not happy ones, but real. I looked out across the room. I'm not running for anything. I don't want to lead this community, but I do expect whoever does to remember what got us here. This neighborhood wasn't broken by noise violations or robe sightings. It broke the moment someone decided fear was an easier management tool than truth. Harlan handed me a form. Just a final signature to certify the board's dissolution. I signed without hesitation, and then, as if summoned by instinct alone, Merrill walked in. No clipboard, no entourage, just her, dressed in slate gray, like she'd stepped out of a courtroom and wandered into a wake. She didn't sit. She walked up to the table, lifted her nameplate, and stared at it for a long moment. Then she set it down, turned to the room, and said one sentence. "I was only trying to protect us." No apology, no concession, just the quiet delusion of someone who believed control was love. Someone asked if she planned to stay in the neighborhood. She didn't answer. She walked out just as slowly as she came in. No one followed her. Later, after the meeting ended, I stayed behind to help Harlan fold chairs. He worked quietly, hands slow but sure. "You didn't gloat," he said. "Didn't need to." He nodded. "She'll sell. Maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Once the insurance catches up." "I don't care if she does." "Why not?" "Because she already lost the only thing she ever cared about," I said. "Control." Harlan didn't argue, just picked up another chair and stacked it. By the time we finished, the clubhouse was empty again. No banners, no plaques, just a plain room waiting to be filled by something new. As I stepped outside, the breeze shifted through the sycamore trees that lined the path back to my house. The sky was just beginning to turn amber, soft light spilling over the roofs. I paused near the edge of our lawn, looked back at the space that had once governed us. It looked smaller now, and for the first time in years, it felt like the neighborhood belonged to its people again. The letter came a week later. It wasn't official, no header, no signature. Just a folded sheet of paper left at our doorstep, slipped under the mat sometime before dawn. No envelope, no threat. 3 words, handwritten in looping cursive. "You were right." There was no name, but I recognized the paper. HOA stationery from the supply batch Merrill used during her early years on the board, back when she still believed in newsletters and thank you notes, before the rules turned into weapons. I burned it in the fire pit, not out of spite, but finality. Some things need to end without a trail. Calla sat beside me that evening, her chair back in place by the bay window. The same window Merrill tried to ban, the same one that held every sunrise we nearly forgot how to enjoy. She was writing again, not journals now, plans, real plans. She'd spoken to the city library about starting a weekly community circle for women who'd been isolated by polite policy, people who'd been talked over, fined into silence, or labeled disruptive for simply being visible. She was done being invisible, so was the neighborhood. The transition to the Stewardship Council had moved quickly. Residents volunteered in groups, finance, maintenance, conflict resolution. The rules were public, editable, and stripped of all aesthetic authority. Nobody could fine you for a bench cushion or a curtain anymore. If someone had a problem, they had to face their neighbors, not hide behind a scanned PDF. And the best part? No president, no singular point of failure, no crown to steal. We were walking into something messier, but honest. Merrill's house went dark the following week. The blinds drawn, the flower beds overgrown. A "for sale" sign appeared at the edge of her lawn, planted crooked like it had been shoved in. Fast. She didn't hold an open house. No flyers, just silence. A few neighbors speculated where she went. California, upstate. Maybe a condo with no board to run. I didn't care. Harlan stopped by the next afternoon with a box. "Old records," he said. "The ones we're not keeping. Thought you might want the last look." I opened the lid and saw it, her meeting agendas annotated in the margins, scribbled reminders like Titan chair language and target non-compliant mailbox. And at the bottom, tucked beneath all of it, was a photo. One I'd never seen. A neighborhood barbecue, years ago, long before I moved in. Meryl was smiling, genuinely smiling, surrounded by people who still trusted her. She hadn't started with malice, but something had changed along the way. Maybe it was power. Maybe it was fear. Maybe she just liked what control felt like in her hands and never noticed when the steering wheel turned into a lever. I handed the photo back to Harlan. He slipped it in his coat. We didn't speak of her again. That night, Calla brewed 2 cups of tea. Real loose leaf. The expensive kind she used to save for birthdays. She carried them to the window, set them down gently, and sat. The yellow notepad rested on her lap, half full. "They've stopped staring," she said softly. "No more whispers, no more avoidance. Julia even asked if I'd help with the kids' poetry night next month. Are you going to?" She nodded. "I already said yes." I took a slow sip of tea and let the warmth settle into my chest. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, unbothered, unafraid. For the first time in a long time, peace didn't feel like a break between battles. It felt earned, not because we fought louder, but because we refused to be erased. So, if you're still watching, still wondering if standing up is worth the noise, I'll tell you this: they only win if you surrender the light they can't control. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is pull open the curtain, sit down in your own chair, and let them see you. Where are you watching from? Because out here, in this little pocket of defiance, we're finally free.